most vibrant in the world. The government order to close bars came when business was already dramatically declining, partly because tourist arrivals are down almost 77% this year. Bar owners are worried the enforced closures could be extended.
In the worst scenarios, we need to close the business. Yeah, like no choice. But on this time, we try to survive. We still have staff. We have our employees that they still need to pay for the rent, for the living, for take care of their family. So we try our best to take care of them.
There is no management taking care of the more vulnerable, the 21 million Thais who have informal jobs such as street food vendors, many of whom are already struggling to survive.
My business is getting worse and worse. I don't know if they will shut Bangkok down or not, but if they do, we are in trouble because we won't have money or food if we stay at home.
Thailand's economy has been resilient in the past and traditionally bounces back quickly from major setbacks. This evolving shock to an already vulnerable system will test that resilience like never before. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
Well, as concerns continue to grow about the spread of the coronavirus, aid agencies are sounding the alarm about the vulnerability of refugees. Mohammed Jamjoon reports now on efforts by aid workers and migrants to combat COVID-19.
A population so traumatized by violence, now terrified of a virus. In northern Syria, after 10 years of war and humanitarian catastrophe, medics are doing all they can to prevent an outbreak of COVID-19. Masks are being handed out, parents are trying to protect their children, but everyone seems to know it's not nearly enough.
We have very little equipment and supplies, not just right here, but in all of northern Syria.
In Bangladesh, where around 750,000 Rohingya from Myanmar are in camps, youth activists are teaching refugee children about the importance of proper hygiene. Anxiety in the largest refugee settlement in the world is on the rise. Warnings from aid agencies are stark.
Imagine then what it would cause in densely crowded refugee camps, community centers filled with civilians in a war zone, displaced people fleeing to informal settlements in places where there is little or no water, no washing facilities, little hygiene, and no healthcare.
In Greece, Doctors Without Borders has urged the government to evacuate refugees from overcrowded camps they say provide the perfect storm for a COVID-19 outbreak.
We have one water point for 1,300 people in Moria. We have one toilet for 200 people. And if we ask people today to call the doctor if they have a problem, there is no doctor to call. And if we ask these people today to isolate themselves, there is no space for isolation.
This week, the United Nations Refugee Agency announced that due to severe travel disruptions around the world, travel arrangements for resettling refugees are being temporarily suspended.
We are appealing to states and working very closely with them to ensure that movements can still continue for the most critical of emergency cases, wherever that's possible.
As panic over the pandemic spreads around the world, refugees and the internally displaced are, as always, just trying to survive. People long accustomed to uncertainty, for whom life has suddenly become an even greater challenge. Mohammed Jamjoon, Al Jazeera.
Still to come here on the News Hour for you. Despite the virus outbreak, one of Europe's top leagues is still running. Farah will have more when we come back in a minute or two.
Business Latest is brought to you by Nebraska Power. Business Latest is brought to you by Nebraska Power.
Time for the sports news. Here's Farah.
Peter, thank you so much. The English Premier League have been holding an emergency meeting to discuss ways of trying to complete its season. The Football League has decided to extend the current ban to April the 30th. Clubs have been talking via conference call. The EPL had initially suspended matches until April the 4th. Ideally, they want to finish the season by the end of June. Our sports correspondent Lee Wellings joins me now. And Lee, what has come out of that meeting?
Well, there can be no certainty about absolutely anything at the moment, but what has happened is that a principle has clearly been put in place with agreement across English football. This is agreement between the Premier League, between the Football Association that ultimately run English football, the English Football League for smaller clubs. They've come together and said that for starters, the FA said the ban on all football extends to April 30. There was absolutely no choice or option about that. But then there's this possibility, no more than that, of playing games in June with Euro 2020 moved. Realistically, that's not going to happen. You're not going to get football being played in England, even behind closed doors in June. But it's the principle that's now in place that they want to finish the season. Now, this thought and idea will be a huge relief, for instance, to fans of Liverpool who were on the verge, of course, of winning their first league title for 30 years. And the worry, what was creeping in, is the language of null and void. This was raised most prominently by the West Ham Vice Chair, Karen Brady, who said that's how the season should go. She's since retracted that. But that language of deciding that we'll say that this season that happened in these extraordinary circumstances, that's null and void, and we'll just start again in later in the summer if possible. That is starting to be removed, and this principle in place of finishing the season. Now, other countries have also said, whether it's Spain or Italy, we want to finish our seasons, and we're starting to get that tone across the world of people wanting to finish off. It's just a case of course, when that will be.
And Lee, how has this all been affecting smaller football clubs in the UK?
Well, smaller clubs, we're talking about not just footballers, we're talking about, of course, employees, who aren't on the pitch. So many lives affected in so many different ways by this crisis. And as a business, football's going to take a huge hit. In time, we'll see whether there needs to be any government intervention in the UK there. For now, the English Football League have released its money that they were always going to be able to give, but they've released early over $50 million for smaller clubs, whether it's in the Championship, they'll get nearly $1 million each. And throughout the entirety of the league, and of course in English football, it goes into a lot of different levels of what's called non-league. Now, all of these clubs, whether they have part-time players, the staff that they have there, they're all in a state of real uncertainty and misery at the moment, wanting to know what the future is for them. Now, the question of whether games and seasons get completed almost becomes secondary to jobs and livelihoods and the existence of clubs as well. And there does feel, sadly, an inevitability, like some clubs might suffer so much from this, they'll be holding on to their futures by a thread.
OK, Lee Wellings reporting live for us. We'll catch you in a bit. Well, the Turkish Super League is the only top-level division in Europe still running despite the coronavirus outbreak. However, it's facing pressure to suspend matches as soon as possible. With 9 games set to happen behind closed doors through to Sunday, Global Players Union FIFPro have urged the league to urgently reconsider their decision. FIFPro revealed they've been contacted by a number of the league's foreign stars who are uncomfortable about having to play. The Olympic flame has been officially handed over to organizers of this year's Tokyo Games. The official plan is still for the Summer Games to take place as planned. No fans were in attendance for the ceremony, which took place in Greece on the site of the first modern games in 1896. Many athletes want the Games to be postponed due to coronavirus, but the president of the International Olympic Committee doesn't agree and is still targeting July 24th for the start.
We were confronted with many questions concerning the qualification system and the restrictions
to take place as
being
planned.
in place.
No fans were in attendance for the ceremony, which took place in Greece on the site of the first modern games in 1896. Many athletes want the Games to be postponed due to coronavirus, but the president of the International Olympic Committee doesn't agree.
Is definitely to get to the 24th of July and the Tokyo Olympic Games, but we also have to be realistic and not panic at this stage and know that this landscape is changing hourly and daily for everyone around the world.
The Australian Olympic Committee is in favour of trying to make the Games happen. The head of their team has been outlining the challenge of trying to keep athletes healthy.
Any athlete or coach or support staff or person involved with the Games will go into a corona-free environment. That is the basis on which we're working. So then we're working here in Australia is how do we ensure that our athletes are coronavirus free when they get to Japan, or how do we quarantine them within Japan? And that's obviously of paramount importance to us. It's what makes the Games possible.
Formula One organisers are working on plans to reshape their calendar with a reduced number of races. Mid-season break has been moved from August and will now be held in March and April to give the sport some chances of staging races later in the year. The opening 4 rounds of the season have already been cancelled. The next 3 events in the Netherlands, Spain and Monaco are likely to be called off as well. Okay, and that is all your sport for now. Peter, back to you.
Farah, thanks very much. Adrian is in the chair on the other side of the break with another news hour for you. I'm back from 7G tomorrow. See you then.
The shocking treatment of disabled people in Eastern European state-run care homes.
In these cages, you cannot have access to a toilet or water.
Amid bureaucratic indifference to their plight.
He has his hands and his feet tied to the bed.
5 years after first highlighting such abuses, People in Power returns with a 2-part investigation to continuing mistreatment and neglect. Europe's recurring shame, Part 2, on Al Jazeera.
The latest news as it breaks.
The pollution is blamed on thousands of small-scale gold mines. Working round the clock at this one, boys as young as 15 and dozens of men.
With detailed coverage.
New restrictions every day across the world as each country fights its own battle against the coronavirus.
From around the world.
The publication of Weinstein's assaults launched the Me Too movement. Millions of women took to social media to say it happened to them too, and it has to stop.
The grim consequences of Mexico's bloody drug wars.
Watch the people around you, Mr. Governor. You've got people who are with the narco.
Through the eyes of the journalists, determined to report the truth.
Your government is full of narco, she said. That's how the article should start.
6 years on, we revisit the reporters still risking their lives.
Lately, there's been another outbreak of violence, of murders.
Rewind, the deadliest beat, on Al Jazeera.
Hidden away in their rooms, 1 million Japanese shun the outside world. 101 East investigates why so many young and old feel lost in Japan. On Al Jazeera.
When you see big groups of people walking through Europe, they're all individuals with children and with lives. You have to hear all of them and to treat them with some dignity and respect.
This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is the News Hour live from Doha, coming up in the next 60 minutes. A surge in deaths in Spain, nearly 3,000 new infections in Germany, and a record daily death toll in Italy. Europe bears the brunt of the coronavirus pandemic. US stock markets opened down again as governments around the world implement measures not seen for decades to try to combat the coronavirus. cautious optimism, though, in China. No new local cases on the mainland since the coronavirus outbreak began there in December.
We have a daughter, we have dogs, she has a lot of medical bills, and I don't know how we're going to get through this.
And as more US restaurants and shops close their doors, thousands of workers are left wondering how they'll survive. It's almost 2 weeks since Italians were ordered to stay at home as Italy confronts its worst national crisis since the Second World War. The confinement of millions of people has crippled the world's 8th largest economy, but the Prime Minister says that it's the only way to fight a virus that's led to the deaths of nearly 3,000 Italians. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte says that he will extend the restrictions, that Italy has a reported 475 deaths, more than any nation on a single day. It's the worst affected country in Europe. Similar measures in Spain don't seem to be stopping infections. There are more than 15,000 now. Spain has also seen a 30% rise in the number of deaths in just 24 hours. The virus there has claimed 767 lives. The contagion shows no sign of slowing in Germany either, with a surge of nearly 3,000 infections in a single day. This interactive map by the Johns Hopkins University gives us all the data from the total number of confirmed cases, the deaths and the recoveries. Nearly 9,000 people have died from virus-related complications across 159 countries. Let's go live now to London. Al Jazeera's Lawrence Lee can tell us more. Let's start, Lawrence, with Italy, where 2 weeks after the lockdown began, the situation seems to be getting worse, not better.
Yeah, and it is actually raising the question, Adrian, of what is a lockdown and when is a lockdown actually, as opposed to something else. In Italy, it's quite confusing actually, because obviously we're getting used to seeing these pictures of a sort of deserted Rome and Venice and all these sorts of things. But the Italian version of the lockdown still says that people can go to work. And it was very interesting that the vice president of the Chinese Red Cross has been paying a visit, because China's been supplying Italy with huge amounts of medicines. He said he was shocked to see so many people walking around Milan and having dinner and this sort of thing. He said that it isn't going to work as it is at the moment, and only if you stop all economic activity, as clearly Hubei did, are you actually going to be able to get on top of it. And as you say, this Italian version of a lockdown, it isn't working at the moment, and they're talking about extending it and keeping the schools closed. But it's still all over the country, 475 new deaths in a single day, and every chance that Italy will soon overtake China as the country with the biggest number of deaths.
And what about the wider EU, Spain, Germany and France? Paris, it seems, finally getting tough on people and making them stay at home.
Yeah, you see that the French version is much stricter. You're only allowed to go to work in France if you can't do it over teleconference or over the computer at home. Other than that, you're only allowed to leave the house to go for a run by yourself or to take the dog for a walk and that sort of thing. So it's a very different interpretation. But still, cases have been going up. They're not at the same rate. Spain, 209 deaths in a single day. Germany, a big increase as well. And so in all these countries, this peak is now starting to hit. The one thing you can say, though, about some of the richer European countries is that, like Germany, is that they're obviously taking much greater steps now to try to protect particularly poorer workers and those whose incomes aren't guaranteed by finding ways of underwriting their pay.
And Lawrence, what's the situation there in the UK, which seems much more relaxed about the coronavirus crisis than the rest of Europe?
Yeah, and, because everybody has supposed that there's going to be a lockdown in the coming days in London, because it's where the biggest number of cases are. And there were very, very varying ideas in some of the morning newspapers, allegedly quoting Whitehall sources. Some saying, no, it's fine, you'll be able to go out on your bus, on your bike or in a car. Others saying the police are going to be guarding the supermarkets, there's 20,000 troops on standby. only one person at a time to be let out. Downing Street has let it be known to all the journalists this morning that in fact they're not going to stop traffic coming in and out of London. And to that extent, it looks much more, if it's a lockdown at all, a bit like an Italian model. And that's obviously got scientists very, very worried because they think that it's actually going to lead to a bigger rise in cases. Equally, because it's a voluntary code, people still aren't following the advice on things like, for example, not grabbing every single thing you can off the supermarket shelf. Have a look at this photograph. There's been on social media here in the UK this morning. A very, very forlorn-looking ambulance worker. Can we see this photograph or not? Yeah, there it is. At the end of his or her shift, you know, they can't go shopping first thing in the morning. They're trying to help everybody's health care. I mean, what do you do? And people simply aren't obeying the rules. They're just going at it for themselves. And, you know, the head of the WHO said the other day this is going to bring out the best and the worst in humanity. It's very difficult to know in a situation like that because it's deeply, deeply unfair on the people who are in the front line of the fight against the virus.
Is Britain going to have to implement the same sort of measures that we've seen implemented in places like Italy and France, Lawrence?
Well, at the moment, it isn't clear. That there's an emergency bill that's going through Parliament, and they keep saying that's going to clarify a lot of things. And they're obviously having these daily briefings at tea time, UK time, when they've announced new measures. Schools were closing, for example, was the big announcement yesterday. And that in itself is going to keep a lot more people at home. The Prime Minister keeps saying to people, do stay at home if you can. But again, it's at the moment a voluntary code rather than an enforced one. And at the moment, all the messaging, certainly from the briefing this morning to the journalists, was that it's actually going to stay like that. So the spokesman said there is, quote, zero chance of stopping the movements of people in and out of the capital. Now, clearly, these things can all change. But for the time being, they're not going down anything like the route that the Chinese, for example, did and halting all economic activity. But that's before the big wave of cases starts to hit here.
Al Jazeera's Lawrence Lee reporting live there from London. Lawrence, many thanks indeed. The European Union's chief Brexit negotiator has tested positive for coronavirus. Michel Barnier posted this video on Twitter saying that he was in good spirits and feeling fine. The 69-year-old said that he was self-isolating and urged anyone else exposed to the virus to do the same. US markets have opened with modest losses on Thursday, a break from the recent wild swings that sparked by fears of a recession. Let's go live now to Kristen Salumi, who isn't today at the stock exchange. She joins us via Skype from New York, keeping an eye on the opening bell, just over 40 minutes ago, and rather sensibly heeding the advice and working from home. Kristen, what's going on?
Absolutely. It's the new thing to do in New York and in much of the country here, much of the world, I guess. The downward trend in the markets is continuing, unfortunately, despite major efforts by governments and central banks to provide stimulus to the economy. Of the three major indices, the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 are both down just slightly, less than 1% at this time. The Nasdaq actually trading in positive territory for a change. As you said, this has been an extremely volatile week with wild swings in the markets in response to the spreading coronavirus and the economic fallout from that. Since the markets closed on Wednesday, President Trump signed an aid package, $1 trillion stimulus package. The European Central Bank took moves of $850 billion to solidify their markets, purchasing securities following on more action by the Federal Reserve here in the United States. But still, investors are seeing more risks than benefits in the markets right now. One reason for that, jobless claims here in the United States are up. In the last week, they hit a two-year high. And that's more bad news and just seen as a foreshadowing of what is expected to get even worse in the coming months.
Okay.
Major indices now are down more than 30% from their highs.
As we said, Kristen, you're working from home. When will the stock exchange itself move to a more sort of remote version of trading? Is it possible to do that?
It is, and in fact, they announced after closing on Wednesday that they would move to all electronic trading by Monday. So the iconic floor of the New York Stock Exchange will be closed to trading as of then. This is a move that they can do. In fact, less than 10%, sorry, I'm struggling for that number, less than 10% of equities trading is actually done on the stock market floor. Most of it is done electronically. Now all of it will have to be done electronically. And they took that step because 2 people who visited the stock exchange in the last week tested positive for the coronavirus. They began taking people's temperatures when they entered the floor on Monday, and the results came back, and they found that some people did indeed have the virus. And if you've ever been there or seen the pictures of that area, there's a lot of people moving around in close contact. And so out of caution and concern about spreading the virus, they're moving the trading, but trading will continue. The markets will be open, just solely online.
Kristen, many thanks indeed. Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi reporting live there from home in New York. It was another volatile day on Asian stock markets as fears grow of a prolonged global recession. Earlier, my colleague Peter Dobby spoke to Sarah Clark in Hong Kong.
Well, all markets across Asia ended down on Thursday, despite the initial gains when markets opened. Stocks, bonds, gold and commodities all fell. Even the circuit breakers were hit in Seoul, Jakarta and Manila. At the end of the day of trading, gold fell 1%, the Nikkei fell 1%, the ASX 200 dropped nearly 4%. The Kospi index in South Korea was down 8% and the Hang Seng was down by 2.6%. Now, the Australian Reserve Bank, it cut its interest rates to 0.25%. That's the lowest ever in Australia. And the Australian growth-sensitive dollar also fell to a 17-year low. Now, in South Korea, the government announced a range of fiscal measures to try and prop up the economy. Now, this wasn't just the first package. It announced some funds earlier as crisis funds, but today the full fiscal package now for South Korea trying to prop up the economy is worth around $39 billion.
But Sarah, as far as those crucial markets are concerned, clearly they want confidence. Clearly they're not going to get it. But this time last week, when we were discussing here on Al Jazeera, cutting interest rates doesn't work. That's what some analysts were telling us. Also, liquidity, printing money, literally putting cash into the system, doesn't work. So the markets just have to ride this, yeah?
Yes, certainly it does. Cash is king at the moment, as some economists are saying, and other countries that are now trying and curb the spread of the virus and also trying to prop up their economies in doing so. We've got the Australian and New Zealand governments. Both of them have today announced that the closure of borders for foreigners. Now, these particular deadlines, it's Friday 9 p.m. in Australia and Thursday midnight, so all non-residents won't be able to enter those countries from today and tomorrow. Now, this travel ban means that only the Australian residents and citizens can enter, and this is what the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said. 80% of the cases, so more than 3/4 of the cases, are coming from overseas. And as a result, he's trying to stop the spread because at the moment Australia is spreading quite rapidly. These are some of the toughest measures that we've had, certainly in Australia. And New Zealand made the announcement about closing its borders about 30 minutes after. So clearly it's a united effort from both Australia and New Zealand. And earlier today we had Qantas announcing that it would stop all international flights at the end of the month.
The US Congress has passed a $100 billion bill aimed at easing the plight of citizens during the pandemic. It provides for free testing and added unemployment payments, but it won't cover everyone. Thousands will have to choose between work or staying home to care for a loved one. Al Jazeera's Mike Hanna reports from Washington.
With restaurants throughout the country closed, the role of the fast food chains is critical. Most are closed to sit-down diners, but their grab-and-go operations provide an essential source of daily nutrition. It's estimated that more than 790,000 workers at the biggest fast food chains do not have access to sick pay.
We have a daughter, we have dogs, she has a lot of medical bills, and I don't know how we're going to get through this.
We need help here. Seattle's in a crisis, restaurant workers are in a crisis.
The same applies to the large grocery stores, where hourly workers with no sick leave continually restock items like food and hand sanitizers amidst a buying frenzy. Congress has passed a bill that specifies payment for sick leave, but this does not apply to companies with more than 500 workers.
I'm not only worried about my kids, but worried about the workforce that's there, and thinking they have no choice but to show up. Folks that are selling us our groceries, folks that are at the pharmacies right now.
3 years ago, an award-winning documentary called 0 Weeks pointed out that the United States and Papua New Guinea are the only countries in the world that do not provide for paid family leave. Americans have to make the choice between tending to a sick spouse, parent or child, or going to work to generate income. In this time of pandemic, it's an even starker choice for those feeling ill. And the emergency bill now passed by Congress does little to ease the hardship of the tens of thousands out of work.
Congress, we need your help. Our service industry depends on it.
This is unfortunate what's going on, but we need the help. This is a hand up, not a hand out.
We are not high school students. We have mortgages, we have families, and we're scared.
The fact that even in this emergency, Congress cannot agree on the need for universal paid sick leave emphasizes how deeply embedded its absence is in the U.S. corporate structure.
I think the corporate establishment has long fought off what are otherwise incredibly sensible policies. We're feeling the brunt of that right now.
Last week, President Trump paraded corporate leaders who he said had joined the White House in combating the virus. The irony is that it's their long-term policy that threatens to contribute to its spread. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Meanwhile, conflicting guidance from the Trump administration over the coronavirus outbreak is forcing more state governors and local officials to act on their own in the fight against the pandemic. Rob Reynolds reports from Los Angeles.
Lines of fear. People in Los Angeles queue up at a discount grocery store, stocking up on supplies to ride out the coronavirus pandemic. It's a sight that has grown common across the U.S. California has been hard hit by the virus, with hundreds of confirmed cases and more than a dozen deaths. Governor Gavin Newsom was among the first state executives to order drastic steps.
We are calling for the home isolation of all seniors in the state of California. We are directing that all bars, nightclubs, wineries, brew pubs, and the like be closed in the state of California.
State officials have ordered residents of at least 10 California counties to shelter in place, remaining at home except for essential errands. That's more than 8 million people, including the cities of San Francisco and Sacramento. In neighboring Nevada, Governor Steve Sisolak ordered a month-long halt to gambling, shutting down the glittering casinos of the Las Vegas Strip. It's a heavy blow to the state's tourism-centered economy, but Sisolak justified the closure, saying people are dying.
This is not the time for casinos to remain open. This is not the time for community recreation centers, clubhouses, movie theaters, and malls to remain open. If your business brings groups of people together, it should not be open.
Public health officials say social distancing is essential to saving lives, but some governors haven't got the message. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt tweeted a picture of himself with his children in a crowded restaurant, writing, "It's packed tonight," with a hashtag #SupportLocal. After intense criticism, Stitt removed the post and declared a state of emergency in Oklahoma. California Governor Newsom acknowledges the people of his state must endure tough times.
We need to meet this moment head on and lean in, not isolate ourselves to this moment, but lean in and own this moment.
With the world's 5th largest economy, California faces staggering economic losses due to the pandemic. But stringent measures taken now may prevent the virus from doing its worst. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
While the global struggle to contain the spread of the virus continues, there is a glimmer of good news from where it was first discovered in China. It's reported no new local cases on Wednesday, the first time since the virus began in December. But as Scott Heidler reports now from Bangkok, numbers are still growing in other nations in the region.
While countries across the globe continue to seal borders and lock down citizens, the country that saw COVID-19's primary infection for the first time reported no new local cases. In China, the only new coronavirus patients were imported from abroad. As construction and manufacturing resumes after months of shutdown, the epicenter for the virus, Wuhan City and the surrounding Hubei province, reported no new cases also for the first time.
We are delighted to see this 00 increase. This means today we have seen the dawn after so many days of hard effort.
There's been an uptick of infections in South Korea, this after a small cluster was discovered at a nursing home. To help offset the economic impact of the coronavirus, the government announced a support package to help small businesses. With two previous packages, the total financial aid now tops $39 billion.
We should think about ways to support those who have suffered from income loss or lost their jobs due to the coronavirus.
The Asian stock markets continue to struggle as concerns over economic disruption from the virus continues. South Korea's Kospi led most of the region's major markets in losses. Thailand announced its biggest single-day jump in coronavirus cases, at least 60. Some of them were people returning from a mass gathering of Muslim missionaries in neighboring Malaysia. Thailand has closed some of its border crossings with its southern neighbor. One of Japan's biggest tourist draws is cherry blossom season, now in full swing. But because of fear over spreading the virus, viewing parties and picnics are discouraged and events have been canceled. The Japanese government just announced that tourist numbers for last month were down over 58%. That's the biggest drop in 9 years since the tsunami and earthquake in 2011 that triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera.
Thailand's infamous nightlife is also feeling the effects of the coronavirus. The government there has ordered the closure of all bars and entertainment venues in the capital. With few tourists, huge numbers of workers who have informal jobs have lost their income. Wayne Hay reports from Bangkok.
Outside one of Bangkok's famous Thai boxing stadiums, a makeshift coronavirus testing clinic has been set up. It's for fighters, spectators and anyone else who was here in recent days as the number of cases surged in Thailand, including a cluster at another boxing stadium across town. The Prime Minister has ordered entertainment venues and bars to close for 2 weeks.
The government will keep evaluating the outbreak situation both in the country and internationally, as well as its economic impact, closely and carefully.
The virus, at an icon of Thai culture, may remove any lingering complacency about a crisis that could deliver an economic knockout. Thailand's economy was already struggling after a coup and 5 years of military rule. Last year's election did little, if anything, to brighten the outlook, and this situation will almost certainly send it into recession. Coronavirus and the measures to contain it have altered the economic and social landscape of Bangkok, particularly its notorious nightlife, one of the most vibrant in the world. The government order to close bars came when business was already dramatically declining, partly because tourist arrivals are down almost 77% this year. Bar owners are worried the enforced closures could be extended.
In the worst scenarios, we need to close the business. Yeah, like no choice. But on this time, we try to survive. We still have staff. We have our employees that they still need to pay for the rent, for the living, for take care of their family. So we try our best to take care of them.
There is no management taking care of the more vulnerable, the 21 million Thais who have informal jobs such as street food vendors, many of whom are already struggling to survive.
My business is getting worse and worse. I don't know if they will shut Bangkok down or not, but if they do, we are in trouble because we won't have money or food if we stay at home.
Thailand's economy has been resilient in the past and traditionally bounces back quickly from major setbacks. This evolving shock to an already vulnerable system will test that resilience like never before. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
An unprecedented number of countries are closing their borders, cancelling flights and imposing travel restrictions. We've just heard that Senegal is to close its borders from midnight on Friday. Here's a look at some of the others. Australia and New Zealand are among the latest to ban everyone from entering except for citizens and residents. In Southeast Asia, Malaysia sealed its borders on Wednesday, stopping workers who commute to neighbouring Singapore. In the Middle East, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia stopped all international flights. Here in Qatar, no foreigners can land. Only Qataris are allowed home before going into self-quarantine. European Union leaders have agreed to seal all borders to non-EU countries for 30 days. In South America, foreigners are denied entry to many countries, including Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Colombia and Peru. Honduras and Ecuador are enforcing full border closures. Canada is closed to non-citizens and residents, and only essential travel is allowed within the United States. Iraq's government has imposed a week-long curfew in the capital Baghdad and other cities to try to stem the spread of COVID-19. It includes the suspension of all commercial flights. Authorities have registered 164 cases and 12 deaths. Al Jazeera's Simona Faltin reports now from Baghdad.
It is the second day of a week-long curfew here in Iraq's capital, Baghdad, and we are at what is usually a very busy intersection in Baghdad's Mansour neighborhood. But as you can see, the streets are largely deserted. There are checkpoints that have been set up by the security forces to enforce the movement restrictions. They're demanding badges from any cars that are moving around to justify their movement. Of course, we as journalists, we are exempt from the curfew, as are healthcare workers. But for many other people, these movement restrictions will have a great impact on their livelihood. The majority of Iraqis are employed in the informal sector, be it as shopkeepers, as taxi drivers, and this curfew means that they can't get out to earn a living. You can see on my left side over here the shops that remain entirely closed. This means that those shopkeepers will be taking a great hit in terms of the income that they're making. And anybody associated, of course, with those shops will not be earning a salary. Now, the Corona Crisis Committee in Iraq has said that this curfew is the only way to try to manage the crisis in the country, because the concern is that Iraq's healthcare sector, under the best of circumstances, is not equipped to deal with very large volumes of patients. Last year, the government allocated less than 3% of its budget to the healthcare sector, and the hospitals are already struggling because they're underfunded, they're understaffed, they're undersupplied. So the idea is to try to prevent a sharp rise in cases. But of course, as this curfew continues, and there is a chance it may be extended, the economic ramifications of these movement restrictions may be severe.
New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo is due to make a statement shortly. We're also expecting a national address by India's Prime Minister Modi. Stay with us here on the News Hour. We'll get a weather update next. And then how aid agencies are trying to protect vulnerable refugees from the coronavirus. And holidaying students flaunt calls to avoid large gatherings despite strict health warnings. We'll be right back.
That's serious. It's serious. It's more serious things out there like hunger and poverty, and we need to address that.
Hello there. The mild theme continuing throughout much of Japan. Plenty of clouds streaming to the east of there, and also still sitting in southern areas of China. This is where we could see more rain over the next couple of days. But of course, it has been a very mild winter in Japan, and this is the result. It's the earliest start to the cherry blossom season since 1953. And my goodness, it is a sight for sore eyes. The weather conditions still a little bit unsettled as we head through Friday. Some stiff winds coming in from the west, some rain showers. It should be fine and dry in Tokyo. Temperatures still above the average, about 7 degrees above the average. More rain showers in Hong Kong, could be heavy at times, and then it's a dry day Saturday, but that is when all the rain really develops through the interior and across into more eastern areas. We could have some local flooding, very heavy rain at times. Similar story really across into Borneo, Sulawesi, some very heavy rain here throughout Friday. The showers a little bit lighter in nature throughout much of Sumatra and also Java, but there's no getting away from it. It is that time of year, so the rains will continue. And then into India. Now, first of all, to the far north and west of there, we have got rain showers through Afghanistan, pushing on into Pakistan. It does mean the rain is on the way to you in Lahore, and we could see some scattered thunderstorms in New Delhi for the next couple of days, but it doesn't really help the temperature. Still very warm, as you can see there, with a high temperature of 31 Celsius.
full of struggles.
Nadie lucha para perder. Y la parranda no solamente para mí, todo lo que estamos aquí, la parranda no es todo.
Full of pleasure.
Mi Cuba es lo más grande que tengo, es la parranda. Sin parranda no hay Cuba.
An intimate look at life in Cuba today.
Nosotros hace años jugábamos con el carne, pero ya este año no, este año hay que prepararse.
My Cuba on Al Jazeera.
From the Al Jazeera London Broadcast Centre, two special guests in conversation.
People think that racism is having personal vitriol towards black people.
Right.
And there's no understanding of what systemic racism is.
Unprompted, uninterrupted.
Success comes with opposition. If you're not upsetting people, you're not saying anything.
Efwa Hirsch meets Eniola Aluko.
There is not a family in Britain, I believe, that has not been touched by empire.
Studio B, unscripted, on Al Jazeera.
Hello again, this is Al Jazeera. Adrian Finnegan here in Doha with the headlines this hour. Italy's Prime Minister says that the coronavirus restrictions will be extended past the current April 3rd deadline. On Wednesday, Italy recorded the highest number of deaths in a single day since the outbreak began. I'm going to take you live now to New York, where Governor Andrew Cuomo is making a live statement. Let's listen in.
Federal government is now engaged in a way they haven't been. I think that is very good news. I've worked in the federal government. I was a cabinet secretary. I'm one of the senior governors in the nation. I know what a state can do. I know what the federal government can do. And states don't fight wars. They did it at one time in this nation's history. It was a tragedy. The federal government has the capacity to mobilize the way we need society to mobilize today. And I've had numerous conversations with the president. I spoke with him again last night. He is mobilizing. He's mobilizing the federal government. We had a number of meetings with different federal officials yesterday. And I think that is the best positive sign that the federal government is actually stepping up to the plate. You will see that this has been diagnosed, pardon the pun, as a healthcare crisis from moment one. This has always been about one thing: reducing the rate of spread so the healthcare system can manage it. And it's been a question of math and projections, and it is still exactly that. Can we get the spread down to a rate that the healthcare system can manage? What is going to be the issue in the healthcare system? It's going to be the number of hospital beds. It's going to be the amount of protective equipment. And most of all, it's going to come down to ventilators, a piece of equipment that up until now was relatively inconsequential. But when you have respiratory illnesses and then this volume of respiratory illnesses, all of a sudden the number of ventilators becomes critical. Just to give you a sense of scope, we have about 5,000, 6,000 ventilators that we can identify. We need about 30,000 ventilators. This is a nationwide problem. I was on the phone with the governors from the other states, with the National Governors Association yesterday. Every state is shopping for ventilators. We're shopping for ventilators. We literally have people in China shopping for ventilators, which is one of the largest manufacturers. So this is a major problem. It's an issue that the federal government can actually play a very constructive role. There's something called the Federal Defense Procurement Act, where the federal government can basically order companies to produce certain materials, and we're going to need protective equipment in hospitals. We're going to need ventilators, and that is something that a state can't do, but the federal government can do. Also, as this has gone on, we said we are fighting a war on two fronts. We're fighting the virus, and we're fighting fear. And they are two totally different situations that you have to deal with. In many ways, the fear is more dangerous than the virus. I started working on disasters, emergency situations when I was in my 30s. My first experience was Hurricane Andrew in Homestead, Florida. And I felt it. I saw on the ground what happens when people panic. And the panic and the fear is as dangerous or more dangerous than the hurricane. I've seen it in floods. I've seen it in fires. We now have misinformation and fear and panic, which is as contagious or more contagious than the virus. And we have to deal with both of them. I've had some conversations that are just irrational with people who heretofore were wholly rational. I had a conversation last night with a business person from New York City who I know, who was panicked that New York City was going to be locked down, that there were going to be roadblocks, that there were going to be mandatory quarantine. He was going to be imprisoned in his house. And I said, where did you hear that? Well, that's what they say. That's what I'm hearing. They're saying. And I was saying, look, I would know, right? Because I would have to authorize those actions legally. It's not going to happen. Well, I hear it is going to happen. I said, but I know, but I would have to do it. And I'm telling you, I'm not doing it. It must have taken me 25 minutes just to slow him down to hear the information. When you get that emotional, that fearful, you literally don't process information the same way. So we have to be very aware of that. Clear communication from everyone, from our friends in the media, from the healthcare professionals, from all elected officials. Clear communication, consistent communication, because misinformation, emotion, fear, panic is truly more dangerous than the virus at this position, in my opinion. Because the facts on the virus we know. We've watched it from China to South Korea. We've studied it here. We know the numbers. It is exactly what we said it was. It's exactly what we said it was from day one. We talked about the increased spread. We talked about the vulnerable populations, seniors, compromised immune systems, people with underlying illnesses. So we know what this virus does. We know how it communicates, and we know how to deal with it. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pretty, but we know the trajectory of the virus. Let's just take a deep breath and make sure we're acting on facts as opposed to acting on fear. When you act on fear, then you're in a dangerous place. The facts we can handle. Let me give you a couple of the new facts today. Just to recap, we said we have a plan of action. There are 3 steps: flatten the curve, slow the spread, increase the current hospital capacity, and number 3, identify new hospital beds. Do them all at the same time, which is the challenge. Make government work, mobilize, operationalize, get it all done today. On density reduction, this is a data-driven decision. Look at the increase in the number of cases, look at the hospital capacity, and adjust and do everything you can to slow the increase of the spread so that your hospital system can deal with the growth. We have been taking increasing steps on density reduction because the numbers have been increasing. And again, this is driven by science and by data. We said voluntary work from home, mandatory closing of schools statewide, mandatory reduction of state and local workforce, mandatory tri-state agreement on bars, restaurants, gyms, mandatory in-office workforce cut by 50%. We said that yesterday. The numbers have gone up overnight. I am going to increase the density control today. No more than 25% of people can be in the workforce. Yesterday it was 50%. We're reducing it again, except the essential services that we spoke about yesterday. That means 75% of the workforce must stay at home and work from home. Again, voluntarily, I'm asking all businesses to have people work from home. As a mandate, 75% of your employee base must work from home. In terms of increasing current hospital capacity, our current hospital capacity is about 50,000 beds statewide. Majority of those beds are in downstate New York. Commissioner Zucker is working with the hospital industry. He's going to put out new regulations assessing how many more beds we can get in our existing hospitals. Waiving Department of Health rules, waiving Department of Financial Service rules. How many more beds can we get in those hospitals? And we're working on that aggressively. At the same time, identifying new hospital beds. The Army Corps of Engineers was with us yesterday. We had a very good meeting. We're looking at sites across the state to find existing facilities that could expeditiously be turned into healthcare facilities. And again, when I said the federal response is very welcome, I want to thank the president. He said that he would bring the Army Corps of Engineers here. They came here the next day. I spoke to him last night to follow up on the meeting. So this is going forward aggressively.
New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo there giving a media briefing. He said that the state needs 30,000 more ventilators. They've identified 6,000 already. They need federal government help for that. He says we're fighting the virus and we're fighting fear. Fear is more dangerous than the virus. He says, for example, heard a lot of rumors about locking down New York. He has no intention, he said, to lock down New York. And he talked about this plan of action that the state has, which sounds very much like the UK's plan, which, of course, the UK has had to roll back on of late. Let's join Al Jazeera's Gabe Elizondo, who's live for us in a freezing, damp New York. Gabe, what did you make of that?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing there is the governor of the biggest state in the United States of 19 million people coming out and trying to do two things, as he's been doing several times a day, but in more urgency. Number one, he's trying to calm people of his state, and that's because there's lots of rumors floating around, and even not just rumors, but even the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, has been saying that he is considering a full lockdown of New York City. You have the governor coming out and saying, wait, hold on, that would only cause more panic. Let's not do that. So you basically have him coming out and saying, remain calm, New York. Remain calm, New Yorkers. Given everything that's going on, he's trying to do that because the governor says any sort of complete lockdown of New York City, he said, would cause absolute panic. So he's trying to avoid that. But at the same sense, number two, what he's trying to do is over the last 24 hours, and as you've seen just in this press conference, he is also warning New Yorkers, we are facing a very difficult situation. And in his words, what he said earlier this morning is a potential health crisis in the city. They are short by thousands of ICU beds. They need 30,000 beds. They only have about 1,000 right now available. He said that also the respirators and ventilators that are needed, they are short by about 25,000. These are not needed immediately, but the governor is saying they will be needed in the next few days, potentially. Why? Because the total number of confirmed coronavirus cases in New York State is 2,900 right now, 2,900. That is most likely going to increase exponentially in the coming hours. Why? Because in the middle of the night, New York State tested another 8,000 people. Those results should be coming back again in the next hours, perhaps later today. To summarize, we're in Lower Manhattan, the World Trade Center area right now. As you can probably see behind me there, the streets are very, very empty. This is an area of Lower Manhattan that would normally be very busy around this time, even on a cold day like this. As you can see, pretty much empty. This is where a lot of the major financial office buildings are at. You would see people out here, tourists that normally would be out at the World Trade Center area that's over my left shoulder, completely empty right now. The governor continuing to do a slow close down of the entire state. You know, now he just announced there that 75% of all businesses in New York State now must, 75% of employees of all businesses must now work from home. All businesses in the state can only have 25% of their employees working. That's a mandate by the governor. So the situation increasing in its urgency here in New York.
Al Jazeera's Gabe Elizondo reporting live there from downtown Manhattan in New York. Gabe, many thanks indeed. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been addressing the nation as the government ramps up its response to the virus. New measures include a one-week ban on international passenger flights landing from Sunday. The Health Ministry says that all religious and sporting events should be postponed. People over 65 are being advised to stay home. India has reported 176 cases and 4 deaths due to the coronavirus. Al Jazeera's Elizabeth Puranam has been listening in to the Prime Minister's address. He's still speaking, Elizabeth. What does he have to say?
Well, Adrian, just in the last few minutes, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced to the nation that on Sunday from 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. he is calling for a curfew all over India and asking everyone to stay at home, everyone except for people that are involved in essential services, so government employees, healthcare workers, and also those who work in the media are exempt. Now, this has just happened in the last few minutes. He started his address about 15 minutes ago, and he was saying that the country is becoming complacent because there are a low number of confirmed cases, but he's asking everyone to show their resolve and their restraint, and then he got to the part before talking about how he's encouraging everyone to stay at home. He then said on Sunday that everyone has to stay at home, and that Sunday is going to be a symbol of the nation's self-restraint, and that containing the spread of coronavirus in a country with 1.3 billion people, he reminded people just how difficult it is going to be to do that, and he is still speaking now. So that's what Prime Minister Modi has said. As you mentioned, we already heard from the Health Ministry a few hours ago, and even the Health Ministry with really strong measures, like perhaps for the first time banning all international commercial flights from landing in India from midnight on Friday in just a few hours for 1 week. And again, as you said, they're also advising people over 65 and under 10 to stay at home. They're urging states to enforce everyone in the private sector to work from home, and they also said that they're going to stagger the working hours for government employees so that they don't work in crowded places. Now, both Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Health Ministry also spoke a lot, especially Prime Minister Modi, about social distancing, asking people to stay at home and keep their distance from others. But that is going to be a massive challenge in India. Again, 1.3 billion people, 80% of India's workforce is employed in the informal, the unorganized sector. These are people who often work outside. We were speaking to street vendors yesterday who were telling us that if they don't leave their homes, well, their families will die of hunger. It's that simple for them. So this is going to be an incredible challenge for the government to get so many people, to stay at home when their livelihoods are at stake.
All right. Elizabeth, many thanks indeed. Al Jazeera's Elizabeth Puranam reporting live from New Delhi. Well, as concern grows about the spread of the coronavirus, aid agencies are sounding the alarm about the vulnerability of refugees. Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoom reports now on efforts by aid workers and migrants to combat the coronavirus.
A population so traumatized by violence, now terrified of a virus. In northern Syria, after 10 years of war and humanitarian catastrophe, medics are doing all they can to prevent an outbreak of COVID-19. Masks are being handed out, parents are trying to protect their children, but everyone seems to know it's not nearly enough.
We have very little equipment and supplies, not just right here, but in all of northern Syria.
In Bangladesh, where around 750,000 Rohingya from Myanmar are in camps, youth activists are teaching refugee children about the importance of proper hygiene. Anxiety in the largest refugee settlement in the world is on the rise. Warnings from aid agencies are stark.
Imagine then what it would cause in densely crowded refugee camps, community centers filled with civilians in a war zone, displaced people fleeing to informal settlements in places where there is little or no water, no washing facilities, little hygiene, and no healthcare.
In Greece, Doctors Without Borders has urged the government to evacuate refugees from overcrowded camps they say provide the perfect storm for a COVID-19 outbreak.
We have one water point for 1,300 people in Moria. We have one toilet for 200 people. And if we ask people today to call the doctor if they have a problem, there is no doctor to call. And if we ask these people today to isolate themselves, there is no space for isolation.
This week, the United Nations Refugee Agency announced that due to severe travel disruptions around the world, travel arrangements for resettling refugees are being temporarily suspended.
We are appealing to states and working very closely with them to ensure that movements can still continue for the most critical of emergency cases, wherever that's possible.
As panic over the pandemic spreads around the world, refugees and the internally displaced are, as always, just trying to survive. People long accustomed to uncertainty, for whom life has suddenly become an even greater challenge. Mohammed Jamjoom, Al Jazeera.
Protesters in cities and towns in Brazil have demanded the resignation of President Jair Bolsonaro for his handling of the coronavirus crisis. Bolsonaro says concern about the virus is hysteria and blames China for the outbreak. He's been seen defying medical advice by shaking hands with supporters. South Africa's largest country has reported 4 deaths and more than 400 cases, including government leaders.
I don't expect anything from the government because he's neglecting us, the people. He didn't understand the severity of the problem. How can you make jokes during such a serious situation? How can someone govern like this?
Look, they're dealing with something new. As a matter of fact, this president is so unprepared that he's been downplaying the issue, and now he's on TV wearing a mask. But he said absurdities over and over.
Bolsonaro says that protesters are simply exercising their democratic rights.
About the protests, it seems like a spontaneous movement by the population. Any movement by the population I face is an expression of democracy.
Governments globally are enacting strict measures to contain the coronavirus, and that's raising questions about individual freedoms and privacy rights during a pandemic. Israel has given its security agencies the power to track the mobile data of people who are suspected of having the virus. The government will use the information to force them into quarantine and to warn those who've come into contact with them. South Korea has taken similar steps by using mobile phone and satellite technology to track potential carriers. Crowds of university students in the US are celebrating spring break despite dire health warnings over the coronavirus. Florida is one of their biggest destinations. Bars and clubs have been told to close early. Some beaches and theme parks have also shut, but many are ignoring instructions to avoid large crowds and are potentially putting others at risk. Andy Gallagher reports from Miami.
It's a dream destination for millions of tourists and one of Florida's largest employers. Now the streets, rides and car parks of Disney World in Orlando are deserted. The company's now putting its resources behind food distribution, but in other parts of the state it's a different story. In Miami, university students on their spring break are blatantly ignoring warnings about gathering in large crowds. The governor of Florida has told them to knock it off, but many seem unconcerned about the health risks.
We need a refund. This virus ain't that serious. It's more serious things out there like hunger and poverty, and we need to address that.
What is there to do here other than go to the bars or the beach, and they're closing all of it? It's really messing. I think they're blowing it way out of proportion.
On Florida's west coast too, tourists and locals appear blissfully ignorant of the dangers of the pandemic. The Jordan family, visiting from Tennessee, wrongly believe the whole crisis is a hoax.
There's a lot more people die from the flu and a lot more people die from swine flu than any coronavirus probably will ever kill. Everybody's going to get it eventually. It's a viral infection.
Parts of Miami Beach are now closed, but stiffer measures may be needed. It's hard to believe this far into the crisis there are some that appear unconcerned with the pandemic. While the young are less at risk, they're not exempt. They may not get critically ill, but they could also be carriers for the more vulnerable. Florida thrives on tourism, but the crowds we're seeing here aren't helping. Even President Trump, who until a few days ago was playing down the risks, says young people are taking irresponsible chances.
We don't want them gathering, and I see they do gather, including on beaches and including in restaurants, young people. They don't realize that they're feeling invincible. I don't know if you felt invincible when you were very young, but they were feeling totally invincible or are feeling that way, but they don't realize that they can be carrying lots of bad things home to grandmother and grandfather and even their parents.
Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has warned people not to gather in groups of more than 10. It's a warning that few here seem to be heeding. Andy Gallagher, Al Jazeera, Miami, Florida.
Before we take a short break, let me just bring you up to speed with some of the latest developments. The Bank of England has cut interest rates to a record low of 0.1%. India's Prime Minister appeals to citizens to observe a self-curfew from March 22nd. And Monaco's Prince Albert, a day after making a televised address about the spread of the coronavirus there, has tested positive. I'll be back in just a moment with more of the day's news. I'll see you then.
One of the really special things about working for Al Jazeera is that even as a camera woman, I get to have so much input and contribution to a story. I feel we cover this region better than anyone else.
Working for Al Jazeera is very challenging, in Lebanon in particular, because you have a lot of people that are divided on political issues.
We are with the people. We live to tell the real stories. Al Jazeera's mandate is to deliver in-depth journalism without fear and favor to the audience across the globe.
Young women with a passion for space.
I used to dream about working in a big, cool company like NASA.
A small step for science, a giant leap for womankind in Kyrgyzstan.
We place it inside, and at a scheduled time, the satellite would be sent into space.
Women Make Science, Kyrgyzstan's Space School, Episode 5 on Al Jazeera.
I overdosed, but my sister saved me.
My relationship with my family hit rock bottom.
The reality of addiction in the Arab world and the struggle of recovery.
It was just me and the drugs.
Al Jazeera World goes inside a rehab clinic in the Nile Delta. Rehab Egypt, Edge of Addiction on Al Jazeera.
This is Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is the News Hour live from Doha, coming up in the next 60 minutes. A big surge in deaths in Spain, nearly 3,000 new infections in Germany, and a record daily death toll in Italy. Europe bears the brunt of the coronavirus pandemic. US stock markets opened down again as governments around the world implement measures not seen for decades to try to combat the coronavirus. Cautious optimism in China, though. No new local cases on the mainland since the coronavirus outbreak began in December.
We have a daughter, we have dogs, she has a lot of medical bills, and I don't know how we're going to get through this.
And as more US restaurants and shops close their doors, thousands of workers are left wondering how they'll survive.
And in sport, football across England will stay suspended until April 30th. The English Premier League agreed for the season to be extended indefinitely in a bid to complete the campaign.
It's been almost 2 weeks since Italians were ordered to stay at home as Italy faces its worst national crisis since the Second World War. The confinement of millions of people has crippled the world's 8th largest economy, but the Prime Minister says it's the only way to fight a virus that's led to the deaths of nearly 3,000 of its citizens. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte says that he will extend the restrictions that are currently in place across the country. Italy has reported a record 475 deaths. That's more than any nation in a single day. It's the worst affected country in Europe. Similar measures in Spain don't seem to be stopping infections there. There are now more than 15,000. They've also seen a 30% rise in the number of deaths in just 24 hours. The virus has led to the deaths of 767 people in Spain. The contagion is showing no signs of slowing in Germany either, with a surge of nearly 3,000 infections in a single day. Now, this interactive map by the Johns Hopkins University gives us all the data from the total number of confirmed cases, the deaths and recoveries. Nearly 9,000 people have died due to virus-related complications across 159 countries. Now, we have the latest with all our correspondents around the globe. In a moment, we'll join Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent, who's standing by for us in Washington. Gabriel Elizondo is in New York, where the governor has just held a media conference. Elizabeth Puranam standing by for us in New Delhi to discuss Prime Minister Modi's latest announcement there. But first, let's go to Niamh Parker in London, who'll tell us about the situation in Europe, starting, Niamh, in Italy, where 2 weeks after the lockdown was implemented, things seem to be getting worse, not better.
That's right. A jump of 475 deaths in a very short period of time. Just to put this into perspective, at the height of the crisis in Wuhan, the death toll was averaging around 150 deaths per day. The situation in Italy right now at 475, obviously 4 times that number. Things are getting very, very critical indeed, and that's despite a near lockdown in Lombardy in the north of the country. That's now been in place for several weeks. That's where the financial capital Milan is. Also, the cultural northern capital of Venice, very much on lockdown. Soon after those areas were closed down, an entire nationwide lockdown encompassing more than 60 million people. All shops, apart from pharmacies and food stores, are closed. But the reality is, having spoken to people in the capital, Rome, it is still possible to go out and work. I spoke to one person who works for a bank who's being told by their boss to still come to the office. And the message coming from a visiting delegation from the Chinese Red Cross is that without a complete economic lockdown on the country, there will be no significant reduction in the number of new cases and deaths anytime soon. Just to remind you, in Hubei province in China, it took 2 months of near total lockdown for them to start noticing a significant drop in figures. We know that some draconian measures have been introduced, that tens of thousands of people have been charged by police. Prison sentences are being discussed as a possibility. But despite all of these measures, the Italian authorities are hoping to revisit the lockdown by April the 3rd. It looks like that may be an unrealistic target to start lifting restrictions there.
At the other end of the Mediterranean, Spain, Niamh, also facing a big rise in the number of cases.
Yeah, that's right. 200 deaths in the past 24 hours, adding to an already rapidly increasing death toll. We've also heard that a four-star hotel in Madrid has been turned into a makeshift hospital. And a huge sum of money, $219 billion, has been released to help shore up the economy, to help dampen the worst effects of the coronavirus on the nation as a whole. That's 20% of the country's entire GDP, just to put that into perspective. Also elsewhere in Europe, the situation worsening as well. In France, this is now the third day of a near total lockdown. We saw 4,000 fines handed out to people for breaching the situation there, a surge in 3,000 new cases in Germany, and also some well-known names and faces are now testing positive for the coronavirus as well. Prince Albert of Monaco, a day after speaking to his tiny nation, now saying that he is testing positive, and also Michel Barnier, a key European diplomat, the head of the EU's Brexit negotiation team, testing positive, adding to concerns that there may be a cluster of cases around the heart of power in Europe, in Brussels, around the European Commission, Parliament and Council.
The streets of Paris virtually empty at midday today. There in London, a very different scene. The Bank of England has reduced interest rates to a record low level, but the British government seems to be taking a very much more relaxed response compared to its European counterparts.
It does, and that always seems to have been the British approach, is to put the science at the heart of things. But what the British government have been saying is that they will incrementally and slowly introduce restrictive measures as and when they will be deemed most successful. But what we've seen really over the past couple of weeks is something of a bit of an about turn when it comes to when these measures should be introduced. People in the UK were told that the height of the virus here in the UK would be in 13 to 14 weeks. All of a sudden, that was reduced to 2, and now people find it on their doorsteps, happening pretty much instantly. At the same time, what we're hearing from the government are only really a series of recommendations. Yes, people are working from home. They've taken up that request quite quickly, but the recommendation to not go to bars and restaurants and cafes remains that. These are not strict orders, as we've seen in France. So the question is, when things do worsen, and they're likely to worsen very quickly, are we going to be looking at a situation down the line where we think more could have been done now to ease the situation later? Also, a tremendous amount of misinformation in the media as well. People are being told that supermarkets will soon be guarded by police. People also being told that transport links will soon stop, that the entire capital may soon be in a complete lockdown. It's hard to know how to piece together a full picture with so many competing narratives. But as I said, at the moment, all the government is doing is recommending people take individual action rather than actually enforcing it.
Al Jazeera's Niamh Barker reporting live from London. Niamh, many thanks indeed. Well, for world leaders, tackling the coronavirus pandemic is likely to be the biggest challenge that they'll ever face. But the way that many are going about it is raising questions about their leadership qualities and whether they're using the crisis to further their own political ambitions.
I would like to begin by announcing some important developments in our war against the Chinese virus.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Your own aide, Secretary Azar, says he does not use this term. He says ethnicity does not cause the virus. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China. I want to be accurate. Yeah, please, John. Please. I have great love for all of the people from our country, but as you know, China tried to say at one point, maybe they stopped now, that it was caused by American soldiers. That can't happen. It's not going to happen. Not as long as I'm president. It comes from China.
É grave. Coronavirus is serious and it is concerning, but don't create such levels of hysteria or national commotion so that we can't face this issue.
Let's go live now to Washington. Al Jazeera's White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett is with us. To what extent, Kimberly, is the White House doing a good job here, or is it at the moment just reeling from one disaster to the next?
If you listen to the critics, like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, this is a White House that is moving from one crisis to the next. It's preparing to right now get in place, working with Congress, the third legislative package to try and deal with the effects of coronavirus. But if you ask anyone on the street, none of that support has trickled down in any real form or fashion. So ordinary Americans are also feeling a little bewildered about the response that is being led by U.S. President Donald Trump. In fact, Nancy Pelosi, very strong in her criticisms that when it comes to shortages of supplies, that the U.S. president needs to ramp up production as a result of him triggering the Defense Production Act about 24 hours ago. This would be to address critical shortages of masks, of respirators, and those sorts of things. And in the midst of all this, we're also hearing that there's a real now cash crunch for many hospitals. You have to remember, this is a private health system here in the United States. With all the elective surgeries that have been canceled, that was a major source of revenue for many private hospitals. And as a result, they are now looking to the federal government for help in trying to pay the bills for the influx of patients that they are expecting due to this virus.
All right, so what are we expecting today, Thursday?
Well, in any moment, we should be hearing from the coronavirus task force. They have a daily update. The president was present for the most recent ones. Whether or not that will occur again is unclear, but certainly a possibility. We also know that in the midst of all this, as we're discussing that relief package that is an enormous price tag, Adrian, more than $1 trillion. It's the largest legislative package to deal with coronavirus and really package of any form in the United States history, that we now know that at least 2 members of Congress have tested positive for coronavirus. One Democrat, one Republican. They rub shoulders with all kinds of members as they're working to, put this package forward. And the problem is the majority of them are over 60 in the target age group at risk. So this is a new level of complication as you try to push forward this legislation, work with the White House. You now have the people responsible for doing that coming down with the virus themselves. So that's another question that this coronavirus task force will have to face. And again, that briefing set to begin any moment here at the White House.
Our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett reporting live from the White House. Many thanks indeed, Kimberly. India's Prime Minister has called on people to observe a curfew on Sunday night in light of the coronavirus outbreak. He's just finished a national address in which he announced he'd be forming a task force to deal with the virus outbreak. Earlier, India announced a series of measures to control the outbreak, including a ban on international passenger flights landing. The Health Ministry says that all religious and sporting events should be postponed, and people over 65 are being advised to stay home. India has reported 176 cases and 4 deaths from the coronavirus. Elizabeth Puranam is standing by for us in New Delhi, but first, let's listen in to what Modi had to say.
The coronavirus crisis is very hard to control. There are many big countries that are suffering, so anyone who thinks it won't affect India is wrong.
Right, so Elizabeth Puranam is standing by in New Delhi. Elizabeth, what's been the reaction to the Prime Minister's comments?
Well, so far, Adrian, people are questioning. They're wondering why he's imposed this curfew for just one day. On Sunday, Prime Minister Modi announced that from 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 p.m. that there'll be a curfew, that no one is allowed to leave their homes except for those who work in essential services. He said that's government and healthcare workers, and also people in the media, saying that Sunday will be a symbol of self-restraint. He also spoke about the challenges of containing something like the coronavirus in a country with 1.3 billion people, saying that because India has a low number of confirmed cases, that people are being complacent, and he asked everyone in the country to show their resolve and restraint. So that's what the Prime Minister said. Earlier, a few hours ago, as you mentioned, we also heard from the Health Ministry. They said that there's no more international commercial flights that will be landing in India India from midnight to night in just a few hours for a whole week. And as well as the measures that you mentioned, they're also urging states to enforce that everyone in the private sector work from home. They're staggering the working hours for people in the public sector, government employees, so that they don't work in crowded places. Now, over the last week, things here have been really grinding to a halt. Schools, colleges, gyms, nightclubs, cultural, social centres have been closing. The state of Punjab decided to shut down all public transport today. And one more thing that the Prime Minister really stressed, which the Health Ministry also mentioned earlier in the day, and that's also something that people are going to find very difficult here in India, the massive challenge of social distancing. There are, as the Prime Minister keeps mentioning, 1.3 billion people in India. So many of them, 80%, work in what's called the informal, the unorganised sector. A lot of people work, out on the streets. We spoke to street vendors who told us that if they didn't leave their homes, well, their families would die of hunger. So that's just not an option for them. So how is this government going to contain the spread? It's doing everything it can to stop more cases from coming into the country. But of course, once it's here, it's going to be incredibly difficult for the government to tell people who need to go out to survive, to get by, to stay at home.
Al Jazeera's Elizabeth Puranam reporting live there from New Delhi. Many thanks indeed, Liz. In New York State, the governor has called for calm amid rumours of an impending shutdown in New York City. Andrew Cuomo has addressed the media, explaining how the federal government has been empowered to help fight the spread of the virus.
Coronavirus is a governmental, critical governmental situation. It's a public health crisis. Government has to respond to it, and that's what the coverage is all about. It is a war in many ways, and government has to mobilize as if it is a war. The federal government is now engaged in a way they haven't been.
Let's take you live now to an eerily quiet downtown Manhattan. Al Jazeera's Gabe Elizondo is with us. And Gabe, the governor said that they're fighting two things there in the state, the virus and fear. And he said the fear is more dangerous than the virus.
Yeah, that's right, because there is a lot of fear and worry in New York City. Listen, New Yorkers are notoriously pretty tough folks that can deal with a lot, but there is quite a lot of, and even in the governor's words, panic in New York, because the New York City mayor said that he is considering implementing a shelter in place in New York City. The governor coming out and saying, I'm not going to support that. Because that would only lead to more fear. There's all sorts of rumors going around that New York is going to shut down the subway system and completely block all streets. The governor saying, nope, we're not going to take those extreme steps yet because that would just cause more fear and more panic than there already is. I just want to give you a look at Lower Manhattan, where I'm at right now, and give you an idea of how quiet the streets are here. Normally, this would be packed with people. We're right across from the World Trade Center area. There is a residential area here, so you'll occasionally see someone on a bike or walking their dog or going to get some groceries. But for the most part, as you can see, it is absolutely empty. These office buildings have some of the biggest companies in all of New York here. American Express, Goldman Sachs World headquarters are right there. They are almost completely empty of employees, and that's why you're seeing almost no one on the streets here in Lower Manhattan. Just some numbers that are important. New York State, 2,900 confirmed cases, far more than any other state. Of those, about 1,900 from New York City. Those numbers in New York are going to jump exponentially in the coming hours. Why? Because overnight, New York tested 8,000 more people. So once those numbers come back, we expect it to jump significantly. Both the governor here of New York and of neighboring New Jersey as well, calling for federal help. They say they just do not have enough respirators or intensive care hospital beds that the governors say are going to be needed in the coming days and weeks. So they're calling on the federal government even to deploy troops here to the state if need be to help set up tent hospitals should that be necessary. And the governor of New York said it's not a matter of if that will be necessary, it's just a matter of when.
Al Jazeera's Gabriel Elizondo reporting live there from downtown Manhattan in New York. Gabe, many thanks indeed. Well, in the U.S., conflicting guidance from the Trump administration over the coronavirus outbreak is forcing more state governors and local officials to act on their own in the fight against the pandemic. Rob Reynolds reports now from Los Angeles.
Lines of fear. People in Los Angeles queue up at a discount grocery store, stocking up on supplies to ride out the coronavirus pandemic. It's a sight that has grown common across the U.S. California has been hard hit by the virus, with hundreds of confirmed cases and more than a dozen deaths. Governor Gavin Newsom was among the first state executives to order drastic steps.
We are calling for the home isolation of all seniors in the state of California. We are directing that all bars, nightclubs, wineries, brew pubs, and the like be closed in the state of California.
State officials have ordered residents of at least 10 California counties to shelter in place, remaining at home except for essential errands. That's more than 8 million people, including the cities of San Francisco and Sacramento. In neighboring Nevada, Governor Steve Sisolak ordered a month-long halt to gambling, shutting down the glittering casinos of the Las Vegas Strip. It's a heavy blow to the state's tourism-centered economy, but Sisolak justified the closure, saying people are dying.
This is not the time for casinos to remain open. This is not the time for community recreation centers, clubhouses, movie theaters, and malls to remain open. If your business brings groups of people together, it should not be open.
Public health officials say social distancing is essential to saving lives, but some governors haven't got the message. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt tweeted a picture of himself with his children in a crowded restaurant, writing, "It's packed tonight," with a hashtag #SupportLocal. After intense criticism, Stitt removed the post and declared a state of emergency in Oklahoma. California Governor Newsom acknowledges the people of his state must endure tough times.
We need to meet this moment head on and lean in, not isolate ourselves to this moment, but lean in and own this moment.
With the world's 5th largest economy, California faces staggering economic losses due to the pandemic. But stringent measures taken now may prevent the virus from doing its worst. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
Financial markets around the world are taking a battering due to the crisis. It's been another volatile day in Asia. Let's get an update now on the situation on Wall Street. Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi joins us via Skype from home in New York, where she's been keeping an eye on what's been going on at the New York Stock Exchange and heeding the advice rather sensibly. What's going on, Kristen?
Yes, the volatility in the markets continue. In just the last hour, the major indices here in the United States have moved from red to green. So they are trading in the positive now, up less than 1%, but a positive sign after so much negativity. Efforts by governments and central banks to calm investors may be taking effect. Overnight, we saw President Trump had signed this $1 trillion aid package. The European Central Bank took action to purchase assets there and maintain liquidity in the markets. The Federal Reserve has also taken further action to backstop money market funds here and preserve liquidity. All of that calming investors a bit. We're seeing stocks being purchased, but weigh that against the negative news as well. Jobless claims hit a 2-year high last week. They were up 70,000 more people filing for unemployment benefits. And many people believe that is just the tip of the iceberg, as we have just begun hearing about layoffs in restaurants and hotels and gyms and malls where people are not able to go to work anymore. So a lot of volatility. The markets still overall remain down from their high point. Things are looking a little bit better at the moment, but a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace as investors continue to try to figure out where things are going and how the economy is going to weather this storm.
Kristen, many thanks indeed to Kristen Salumi reporting live there from New York. Well, while the global struggle to contain the spread of the coronavirus continues, a glimmer of good news from where it first emerged in China. There are no reported new local cases on Wednesday. That's the first time since the virus began in December. But as Scott Heidler reports now from Bangkok, numbers are still growing in other nations in the region.
While countries across the globe continue to seal borders and lock down citizens, the country that saw COVID-19's primary infection for the first time reported no new local cases. In China, the only new coronavirus patients were imported from abroad. As construction and manufacturing resumes after months of shutdown, the epicenter for the virus, Wuhan City and the surrounding Hubei province, reported no new cases also for the first time.
We are delighted to see this 00 increase. This means today we have seen the dawn after so many days of hard effort.
There's been an uptick of infections in South Korea, this after a small cluster was discovered at a nursing home. To help offset the economic impact of the coronavirus, the government announced a support package to help small businesses. With two previous packages, the total financial aid now tops $39 billion.
We should think about ways to support those who have suffered from income loss or lost their jobs due to the coronavirus.
The Asian stock markets continue to struggle as concerns over economic disruption from the virus continues. South Korea's Kospi led most of the region's major markets in losses. Thailand announced its biggest single-day jump in coronavirus cases, at least 60. Some of them were people returning from a mass gathering of Muslim missionaries in neighboring Malaysia. Thailand has closed some of its border crossings with its southern neighbor. One of Japan's biggest tourist draws is cherry blossom season, now in full swing. But because of fear over spreading the virus, viewing parties and picnics are discouraged and events have been canceled. The Japanese government just announced that tourist numbers for last month were down over 58%. That's the biggest drop in 9 years since the tsunami and earthquake in 2011 that triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera.
We'll get a weather update next here on the News Hour. Then it's business as usual. For Amazon, we'll tell you why it's defying the economic downturn caused by the pandemic. Holidaying students in the US flaunt calls to avoid large gatherings despite strict health warnings. And in sport, the clay court tennis season officially over before it even began. Farrell will be here with that and the rest of the sport a little later.
It's been very unsettled across northern sections of the Middle East, really, for the last several days, and there is more rain in the forecast. You can see here on the satellite where all the cloud has been sitting, and as I say, there is more to come. But have a look at these pictures. This is Mosul in northern Iraq, and the streets are under water, as you can see. 127 millimetres of rain has come down in the last 24 hours and led to scenes such as this, but it's not really done just yet. Not as much rain on Friday, but you can see it's all developing, still sitting across much of Turkey and beginning to push again into the same region. It's generally very unsettled, and the eastern end of the Med, temperatures very, very low, certainly for this time of year, and again more rain in the forecast as we go through Friday and Saturday. The rain will still be in the forecast across Iraq, pushing through much of western and southern areas of Iran. Very heavy amounts of rain at times, and we could also see rain across into Qatar and also those coastal areas of the UAE. And more rain certainly into Madagascar for the next couple of days, but some very heavy rain developing through the DRC and also across towards Madagascar again on Saturday, pushing across into Mozambique. And we could see scattered showers, very widely scattered throughout much of South Africa. 25 Celsius Johannesburg on Saturday with more showers.
As the world battles the coronavirus pandemic, we'll bring you the latest developments from around the world, with updates about travel restrictions and how to protect yourself. Coronavirus pandemic. Special coverage on Al Jazeera.
Singapore is being accused of expanding its coastline with illegally dredged sand.
Some of the islands off the coast of Indonesia literally vanished.
It's a big business, smuggling sand.
When they go take this sand, they're in killing.
The sand is our barricade.
You see this beautiful beach, but behind it is something that's not so pleasant.
The tragedy is that people are just not aware.
An ecological investigation into a global emergency. Sand wars, at this time, on Al Jazeera.
Join the Listening Post as we turn the cameras on the media.
When the state misleads the public, the state media reflects the same thing.
Does climate change cause... And focus on how they report on the stories that matter the most.
Hello again, good to have you with us. Adrian Finnegan here in Doha with the news hour from Al Jazeera. The headlines: Italy's Prime Minister says that coronavirus restrictions will be extended past the current April 3rd deadline. On Wednesday, Italy recorded the highest number of deaths in a single day since the outbreak began. Spain's coronavirus death toll has risen by 30% in just a day. 767 deaths have been reported there. The total number of people infected, more than 17,000. A two-week nationwide lockdown is currently in force. And India's Prime Minister has called on his people to observe a one-day nationwide curfew on Sunday in order to fight the virus. Also from that day, all international passenger flights coming into the country will stop for a week. While the pandemic and the economic fallout have forced many businesses to lay off employees, Amazon says it's looking to hire new ones. In the US, the company is looking to employ 100,000 new warehouse and delivery workers to meet the surge in demand in online shopping. It's also looking to raise their pay, $2 an hour in the US, in the UK £2 an hour, and €2 in Europe. That's until the end of April. Amazon says that items in the household staples category have long delivery times that have been frequently out of stock. That includes things like water and toilet paper. Let's discuss this a little more with Nolan Gertz, who's a technology ethicist and professor at the University of Twente in Enschede in the Netherlands. Good to have you with us. So is Amazon doing the right thing here? Does the firm have a moral obligation to help the world in the time of crisis? Or are they needlessly risking the lives of their workers? I mean, are the pay rises enough to mitigate the risks?
Right. Thank you for having me. I think it's important to think about what we mean by help. Amazon, of course, has a moral obligation, but it is very important to understand that what is most helpful is not giving people simply what they want in order to help out in the short term.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We'll get back to you in just a few moments. But President Trump is giving a media briefing at the White House. Let's listen into what he has to say.
Omar Fakouri is on his way back to the United States after being imprisoned in Lebanon since September of 2019. He's battling late-stage cancer. Mr. Fakouri will now be able to receive the much-needed care and treatment in the United States. We've been working very hard to get him freed, and he's finally able to have his entire family at his side. So I'm very grateful to the Lebanese government. They worked with us, and we are very proud of his family. They stood by him so strongly, and they are thrilled. The United States has no higher priority than the safety and well-being of our citizens. We've gotten a tremendous number of hostages out, as you know. I think we're 42-0, and Robert O'Brien, as you know, was our chief negotiator for a large part of it. In fact, did so well that now we have him in a different position. So I want to thank and congratulate Robert and his team, and I want to let everyone know that recovering Americans held captive and imprisoned abroad continues to be a top priority for my administration. We have one young gentleman, Austin Tice, and we're working very hard with Syria to get him out. We hope the Syrian government will do that. We are counting on them to do that. We've written a letter just recently, but he's been there for a long time, and was captured long ago. Austin Tice, his mother's probably watching, and she's a great lady, and we're doing the best we can. So, Syria, please work with us, and we would appreciate you letting them out. If you think about what we've done, we've gotten rid of the ISIS caliphate in Syria. We've done a lot for Syria. We have to see if they're going to do this. So it would be very much appreciated if they would let Austin Tice out immediately. As you know, my administration is working every day to protect American people and the American economy from the virus. Yesterday, I signed into law a critical support for American workers, families, and small businesses. It's a big thing. We're providing sick leave and family medical leave to those affected by the virus, and more help is on the way as we speak. Our entire team, headed by Secretary Mnuchin, is on the Hill. We're working with Democrats and Republicans, and there's a lot of goodwill going on. This was something that happened that was, some people would say, an act of God. I don't view it as an act of God. I would view it as something that just surprised the whole world. And if people would have known about it, it could have been stopped in place. It could have been stopped right where it came from, China. If we would have known about it, if they would have known about it. But now the whole world almost is inflicted with this horrible virus, and it's too bad. It's too bad, because we never had an economy as good as the economy we had just a few weeks ago. But we'll be back, and I actually think we'll be back stronger than ever before, because we learned a lot during this period of time. I also just invoked the Defense Production Act to help facilitate distribution of essential supplies if necessary. We're working with Congress to provide major additional relief to the workers, small businesses, and the hardest hit industries. We want to make sure that everybody is able to continue on, so that when we recover, all of these companies and these great businesses, both very, very small and very, very large, they're not going to be broken up, and you'd have to put them back together. That would take a long time, because we really I believe in the V curve. I believe it's going to go, when this is defeated, this hidden scourge is defeated, I think we're going to go up very rapidly, our economy, and get back to where it was and beyond. Today, I want to share with you exciting progress that the FDA is making with the private sector as we slash red tape like nobody has ever done it before. Somebody was on yesterday on one of the networks and said that there's never been a president even close that's been able to do what I've done in slashing all of the red tape and everything to get very important things to the market, medical. So we slash red tape to develop vaccines and therapies as fast as it can possibly be done, long before anybody else was even thinking about doing this. And as you know, earlier this week, we began the first clinical trial of a vaccine candidate for the virus, and that was launched in record time. It was just a few weeks, and that would have taken years to do, not so long ago. As we race to develop a vaccine, we're also pursuing antiviral therapies, and that's what really we're going to be talking to you about today. That's the purpose of being up here today. And to me, that's even more important. The vaccine, by its nature, you have to have long tests, because you have to make sure what goes into somebody's body is not going to do destruction, do bad things. So you need long tests. And they're doing great with the vaccines, but it's still a long process. But the therapies are something we can move on much faster, potentially. And the treatments that will be able to reduce the severity or duration of the symptoms, make people better. Essentially, we're looking at things to make people better, or at the very earliest stages, they wouldn't even know they had it. And that's where I believe it's going to work even the best. The FDA Commissioner, Stephen Hahn, who's with us, He's fantastic. And he has been working 24 hours a day. He's been, he's worked like probably as hard or harder than anybody in the group, other than maybe Mike Pence or me. And what the FDA is doing is incredible. They've done things in times that were not even thinkable. And I've directed the FDA to eliminate outdated rules and bureaucracy so this work can proceed rapidly, quickly, and I mean fast. And we have to remove every barrier. There were a lot of barriers that were unnecessary. And they've done that to get the rapid deployment of safe, effective treatments. And we think we have some good answers. We'll find out very, very soon. Clinical trials are already underway for many new therapies, and we're working on scaling these to allow many more Americans to access different drugs that have shown really good promise. We've had some really good promise. We will do so in a way that lets us continue to collect good data to know which medicines are safe and which medicines are working the best. We have a couple that we're in really good shape on, and that's for immediate delivery. Immediate, like as fast as we can get it. The FDA has also approved compassionate use for a significant number of patients. You know what that means. We're also reviewing drugs that are approved abroad or drugs approved here for other uses. And, you know, one of the things that I'm most proud of that I got was right to try. That's where somebody who's ill, somebody who's very sick, terminally ill usually. In past administrations, we signed this a year and a half ago. You wouldn't be able to even think about getting any of the drugs that may be showing great promise now. And they've been trying for many decades to get this approved. And it sounds simple, but it's not, because there's liability involved and lots of other things. And I was able to get it approved working with Congress, right to try. This is beyond right to try. What we're talking about today is beyond right to try. Right to try has been, by the way, a tremendous success. People are living now that had no chance of living, where we take treatments that would, things that would have to go through years of a process. And if somebody was terminally ill, and I would say, why wouldn't they be able to try this? They'd go to Asia, they'd go to Europe, they'd go all over the world to try and find something. Or some people, if they had no money, would go home to die. They'd go home to die. They had no hope. Right to try has been an incredible success. But this is beyond right to try. If treatments known to be safe in Europe, Japan, or other nations are effective against the virus, we'll use that information to protect the health and safety of American people. Nothing will stand in our way as we pursue any avenue to find what best works against this horrible virus. Now, a drug called chloroquine, and some people would add to it hydroxychloroquine. So chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine. Now, this is a common malaria drug. It's also a drug used for strong arthritis. Somebody has pretty serious arthritis. Also uses this in a somewhat different form. But it is known as a malaria drug, and it's been around for a long time, and it's very powerful. But the nice part is it's been around for a long time. So we know that if things don't go as planned, it's not going to kill anybody. When you go with a brand new drug, you don't know that that's going to happen. You have to see, and you have to go long test. But this has been used in different forms, very powerful drug in different forms. And it's shown very encouraging, very, very encouraging early results. And we're going to be able to make that drug available almost immediately. And that's where the FDA has been so great. They've gone through the approval process. It's been approved. And they did it. They took it down from many, many months to immediate. So we're going to be able to make that drug available by prescription or states. I spoke with Governor Cuomo about it at great length last night, and he wants to be right on the. He wants to be first on the line, and so I think that's a tremendous. There's tremendous promise based on the results and other tests. There's tremendous promise, and normally the FDA would take a long time to approve something like that, and it was approved very, very quickly, and it's now approved by prescription. Individual states will handle it. They can handle it. Doctors will handle it, and I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be great. Then we're quickly studying this drug, and while we're continuing to study it, but the studying is going to be also done as it's given out to large groups of people, perhaps in New York and other places. We'll study it there. There are promising therapies produced by Gilead, and that's remdesivir, and that's a drug used for other purposes that's been out and it's had very good results for other purposes, but it seems to have a very good result having to do with this virus. And that drug also has been approved or very close to approved in that case by the FDA. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate what the FDA, these people are incredible patriots, and the job that Stephen Hahn is doing, Dr. Hahn, who's one of the most respected doctors in the country, by the way, where we took him. I said, "You sure you want to do this?" Now, we didn't know that this was going to be in the playlist, what happened here, but he really has stepped up to the plate, wherever you are. Where is he? You really have. I'd shake his hand, but I'm not supposed to do that. Get in a lot of trouble if I did that. But he's been fantastic, and I thank you, Doctor. He's going to speak right after I'm finished. So, Regeneron again, is a company that's done fantastically well, as I understand, with Ebola and some other things. Great company, and they're looking at some very promising events also. So you have remdesivir, and you have chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. So those are two that are out now, essentially approved for prescribed use. And I think it's going to be very exciting. I think it could be a game changer, and maybe not. But I think it could be, based on what I see, it could be a game changer. Very powerful. They're very powerful. So I want every American to know that we're doing everything we can. And these actions are important next steps. I mean, for the FDA to act the way they acted with this kind of speed is an incredible thing. Normally they'd say, well, we can have it by next year, or we can have it in 2 years from now. You understand, this is the way. Normally it's like years and years and years. They had it immediately, based on the fact that it's been used for other things, totally unrelated things. We believe these therapeutics and others under evaluation right now will be able to provide relief to many Americans. We really hope that's going to be. This could be a tremendous breakthrough, And we will work toward a much-needed vaccine in the future, as I said. And what we're doing with the FDA is so exciting in so many other fields. So many things are happening. It's a very exciting time for medicine. And we appreciate that the American public has pulled together. They're really staying home. And I think there's tremendous spirit in this country right now. It's spirit like a lot of people have not seen. People have not seen anything like it for a long time. And that means Democrat, Republican, they're pulling together. I hope everything's going good on the Hill. Maybe I shouldn't say this until I check out what's going on, because you never know. But I think there's a great spirit where the Democrats, the Republicans, and everybody else are getting together and they're trying to get things done. But most importantly, the American public has been incredible. We took the best economy we've ever had, and we said, stop. You can't work You have to stay home. You know, there's never been a case like this. Normally, you pay a lot of money to get things going. Here's a case where we're paying a lot of money to stop things because we don't want people to be together so that this virus doesn't continue onward. So there's never been anything like this in history. There's never been. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. But we're doing the right thing. We have to get rid of. I mean, our big war is it's not a financial war. It's a war, and it's a medical war. We have to win this war. It's very important. With that, I'd like to just introduce Dr. Stephen Hahn. And again, I'd like to send back with Stephen our thanks to all of the people working in the FDA who are fantastic, talented people. We appreciate it very much, everything you've done, especially the speed that you got these two elements, these two very important drugs passed. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank you for your leadership during this coronavirus outbreak, and thank you for the kind words about the FDA staff. We have 10,000 scientists, doctors, and others, and more than that, working around the clock to aid the American people in this fight against the coronavirus. And those words are very much appreciated, sir.
Thank you.
So before the president nominated me and I was confirmed as Commissioner of Food and Drugs, I was a cancer doctor. And I've sat across from countless number of patients and had to talk to them about their diagnosis and their treatment. And one thing that was really important is to provide hope. I have great hope for how we're going to come out of this situation. What's also important is not to provide false hope, but to provide hope. And as a doctor, that's the way I come to this. I'm speaking now to the American people as Commissioner of Food and Drugs, but that part of me has not left. Just look at the way the American people have responded to our calls for mitigation, for social distancing. The American people have great resiliency, and I am so incredibly proud of how the American people have responded. As the President mentioned, he asked us to be aggressive, to break down barriers to innovation, and to accelerate the development of life-saving treatments. And we're doing that at the FDA. The FDA is committed to continuing to provide regulatory flexibility and guidance. But let me make one thing clear. FDA's responsibility to the American people is to ensure that products are safe and effective. And yet we are continuing to do that. Our folks and their tremendous professionals are working day and night to do this. You just can't even imagine how much they're working to provide this support for the American people, and I thank them. Since early January, long before the first domestic case, FDA began working in collaboration with CDC. I also want to note that we stood up an incident command group and have been focused on the coronavirus since the very beginning of this public health emergency. This is, in addition, an all-of-government and all-America approach, and I'll describe what I mean by that in terms of the development of therapeutics. An important part of that work is expanding the potential therapeutic options associated with coronavirus, and we've learned from our colleagues across the globe about this. But I want to focus on one thing. I was a cancer researcher before all this, and one thing I know about this great country of ours is that we have unbelievable innovators. We have people who every day, it's their job to develop treatments for all sorts of diseases. We are incredibly blessed as a country to have this. And as is true in any illness, these great American innovators, academia, private sector, they have engaged us about the best possible treatment options. We are looking at everything that's coming across our desks as possible treatment options for coronavirus. And we're extremely encouraged by the interest and the promise that we've seen from these great American innovators. Now, again, we need to look at it. We need the data. We need the information to make the absolute best decisions for the American people. But I want to assure you, we have over 17,000 people at FDA who are doing this every day. We need to make sure that the sea of new treatments will get the right drug to the right patient at the right dosage at the right time. As an example, we may have the right drug, but it may not be in the appropriate dosage form right now, and that may do more harm than good. Those are the things that's our job to look at, and that's why it's really important we have these dedicated professionals looking at these aspects of therapeutic development. At the same time, we're also working through different mechanisms to actually get drugs into the hands of providers and patients. The President mentioned this, but one of the mechanisms is called compassionate use. Let me just tell you about this. If there's an experimental drug that's potentially available, a doctor could ask for that drug to be used in a patient. We have criteria for that and very speedy approval for that. The important thing about compassionate use, and that's what the president meant, this is even beyond right to try, is that we get to collect the information about that. Because one of the things, and our promise to the American people, is we will collect the data and then make the absolute right decisions based upon those data about the safety and efficacy of the treatments. We are working expeditiously, and we are working to make sure that these products are as safe and effective as they possibly can be. Let me tell you about a few things that we're currently working on. And this is a plan that was developed with many of the people at this table, our infectious disease experts on the task force. In the short term, we're looking at drugs that are already approved for other indications. So they're already approved, as the president said, for other diseases. As an example, many Americans have read studies and heard media reports about this drug chloroquine, which is an anti-malarial drug. It's already approved, as the president said, for the treatment of malaria as well as an arthritis condition. That's a drug that the president has directed us to take a closer look at as to whether an expanded use approach to that could be done to actually see if that benefits patients. And again, we want to do that in the setting of a clinical trial, a large, pragmatic clinical trial, to actually gather that information and answer the question that needs to be answered and asked and answered. Let me give you another example. There's a cross-agency effort about something called convalescent plasma. This is a pretty exciting area. And again, this is something that we have given assistance to other countries with as this crisis has developed. So FDA has been working for some time on this. If you've been exposed to coronavirus and you're better, you don't have the virus in your blood, we could collect the blood. Now, this is a possible treatment. This is not a proven treatment. Just want to emphasize that. Collect the blood, concentrate that, and have the ability, once it's pathogen-free, that is virus-free, be able to give that to other patients, and the immunoglobulins, the immune response, could potentially provide a benefit to patients. It's another thing that we're looking at. Over the next couple weeks, we'll have more information that we're really pushing hard to try to accelerate that. That's in the sort of more medium short term, and that'll be a bridge to other therapies that will take us 3 to 6 months to develop. And this is a continuous process. There is no beginning and end to each of this. This is, we're pushing this through. The other great thing about the great innovators of America, some of them tell us it's taken us years to develop therapies. They're looking at pushing that to the months period of time. And we're trying to provide them the regulatory flexibility, but at the same time, the scientific oversight to make sure that gets done in the best way possible for the American people. The president mentioned that there is a vaccine trial currently being performed. It's a phase 1 trial, so it's the earliest study that gets done. We expect that to take 12 months to get to completion, to actually a time where we could approve a vaccine. But these are all things to bridge to the prevention part of this with a vaccine. It's exciting work, and the president is right. This is record time for the development of a vaccine, and impressive public-private partnership. The FDA's efforts to facilitate the development of these products are focused on ensuring timely access while also meeting the agency's world-respected gold standard, relying on strong data from clinical trials to determine if an experimental or an off-the-shelf drug that's used for something else can safely and effectively treat patients. We want to assure the American people that FDA is all hands on deck, as the president mentioned, these efforts, and continue to work with interested sponsors to help expedite the work. We remain steadfast in helping to foster the development of safe and effective therapies for COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mike? Talk about the masks.
Thank you, Mr. President. The White House Coronavirus Task Force met this morning, and on this very first day of spring, we continue to make steady progress toward President Trump's objective not only to marshal all the resources of the federal government, every state government, every local health official, but also to harness the power of the American private sector, and activities over the last day reflect all of those priorities. Yesterday, the President spoke with America's top physicians and nurses and garnered helpful insights about how we can best serve those who are serving Americans that are dealing with the coronavirus. We also had a productive call with over 5,000 state and local officials explaining the federal government's approach and our strong and seamless partnership with all 50 states and the territories. Last night, as you heard, the President signed the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which provides free coronavirus testing, paid sick leave, family leave for caregivers, and food assistance for the needy, among a broad range of benefits. And today, as the President indicated, we expect that the Senate will begin work on an economic relief package. Later today, the President and I will meet again in a teleconference with the nation's governors. We will meet at the National Response Coordination Center at FEMA and outline President Trump's decision to have FEMA take the lead in our national coronavirus response. Our nation's response through FEMA will be locally executed, state managed, and federally supported. On testing, we want the American people to know once again that testing is available in all 50 states and is becoming increasingly available literally every hour of the day. Because of the public-private partnership that the President initiated several weeks ago with major commercial labs, I'm pleased to receive a report today that tens of thousands of tests are being performed every day. And with the passage of last night's legislations, state and private labs are now required by law to report all coronavirus testing directly to the CDC, which will give the American public and also give our researchers timely and important information. It's important for every American to remember that if you don't have symptoms, you don't need to get a test. We want to make sure that testing is available for people that are experiencing symptoms or have a genuine concern about having been exposed to someone with the coronavirus. Dr. Birx will address county-level data as well as the progress we've made on testing, and Americans can expect to see how an increased number of cases as our new testing system comes online should not be a cause of concern. She'll explain the importance of taking into account our new testing system as new data arrives over the next several days. On supplies, a priority the President has given to our task force, we continue to work with healthcare providers, businesses, and state leadership to identify available supplies, not merely in the federal stockpile, but much more importantly, available across the private sector. We're encouraged to see companies like Honeywell and 3M that I visited a few short weeks ago take advantage of the changes in the law last night that allow the sale of industrial masks directly to hospitals. Those companies have now greatly increased by the tens of millions their production of so-called N95 masks that will give our healthcare workers the protection that they need to minister to those that are dealing with the symptoms or the disease of coronavirus. Following the signing of last night's bill, all of those masks now have liability protection, and the companies can sell industrial masks to hospitals. It is encouraging, as we called out yesterday, to see construction companies all across America that are, as we speak, checking their supplies and donating those industrial masks to their local hospitals. And I know I speak on behalf of the President, who spent a lot of time as a builder, when we thank builders across America for partnering with our local healthcare officials. On the subject of ventilators, we're working with healthcare providers around America and suppliers. And we're encouraged to learn that we've literally identified tens of thousands of ventilators that can be converted to treat patients. And we remain increasingly confident that we will have the ventilators that we need as the coronavirus makes its way across America. And as we said before, we're all in this together. And before I step away and give the podium back to the President and to Dr. Birx, I want to call every American's attention again to the President's 15 days to slow the spread. We continue to hear one case after another, one city after another, where people are putting into practice the principles that the President outlined this Monday. And make no mistake about it, that while for the American people as a whole, the risk of serious illness remains low, these guidelines should be practiced by every American in every community, not only to lessen the spread of the coronavirus, but to protect the most vulnerable among us. And I think Americans from their hearts are not only practicing these principles of social distancing and avoiding social gatherings of more than 10 people, using drive-thrus at restaurants to protect their own health and the health of their family, but they're also recognizing that that no American wants to inadvertently convey the coronavirus to someone for whom the consequences could be quite serious. At the President's direction, we'll continue to marshal all the resources of government at every level. We'll be reiterating that strong partnership with America's states this afternoon, with America's governors, pulling all of the private sector energy together, the innovation that you just heard described. I know on this first day of spring that we'll get through this, and we'll get through this together. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Dr. Chris.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. So I know you're watching the data carefully. You can see the dramatic increases in the number of new cases based on our ability to test additional people. And this will continue over the next 2 to 3 days as we begin to have backlogs reduced of the testing. You all have heard the anecdotes of people waiting 5 or 6 days for their test results. We are moving through all of that as well as testing individuals. I really want to applaud the frontline healthcare workers, the nurses and the doctors and the testers that have really prioritized, and the American people who have prioritized those with symptoms. The number of test positives is increasing. That is a dramatically important signature that everybody is doing their job. Mild symptoms are staying home, self-isolating. Those with serious symptoms are coming forward to getting testing. Our test positive rates are now into the 10 to 11% range. That still means that 90% of the illnesses out there, even the severe ones, are not COVID-19. I know many of you are looking at the state level data. Still over 50% of the cases come from 3 states. This is why we continue to prioritize testing in